Welcome to today's meeting of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs, and the first meeting of the new season. I always feel we work on the equivalent of school or university terms. So after the summer break, it's good to see many of you back. And today we have a rather unique talk by Moneeza Hashmi about her father, Faiz, Ahmed Faiz. And she is in conversation with Victoria Schofield, who's well known to many of you, about her relationship with her father and the book that she has recently published about that. In the course of the webinar, I will put a link to the book into the chat channel. So if you want to look at that, you'll have a chance to buy it. In the meantime, I will be handing over to Victoria to run today's event. Could I just, as a practical matter, ask if you have questions, please start posting them in the Q&A channel, and Victoria will be on the lookout and trying to ensure that questions get answered. So thank you very much, and I will hand over to Victoria.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much to the Royal Society for Asian Affairs for hosting this event. I'm delighted to be in conversation with Moneeza Hashmi. Moneeza and I have known each other for many years. We've met in Pakistan, and unusually, we've also shared a panel in Perth, Western Australia, when again, we were discussing your father, Faiz Ahmed Faiz. We are here to talk about your recently published book, Conversations with My Father. And what I think, having gone through the book myself, it's very unique because at a time of reflection, we all of us go back in life and think about our parents who've been deceased and probably want to put questions to them, probably want to share news with them, but sadly, they're no longer here. And perhaps we should also pay reference to the fact that this in conversation is taking place just after the Queen's funeral, which has been very much on our minds, and her passing. And so I think it's very appropriate that we are both in the present, but we're also thinking back to the past. And your father, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, just to put him in his historical context, born in 1911, he died in 1984 in his early 70s. And he is described both as a poet, journalist, and a military officer. And I think what's interesting again about putting him in context of his times, it was the 20th century, a momentous century to have lived, obviously, because he was a very young boy at the time of World War I. But he did serve in the British Indian Army during World War II, because again, this is something we must focus on, was that he was firstly a British Indian, and then he became a Pakistani, obviously, at the time of partition in 1947. Again, another anniversary, because we are now looking at 75 years since partition. What I want to just draw your attention to, dear listeners and viewers, is the introduction, which is a wonderful introduction by another famous poet, Zehra Nigah, who was unusual, I understand, because she began writing poetry in the 1950s as a woman at a time when poetry was mainly written by men. And what she has said in her foreword to your book is letter writing is one of the most beautiful traditions of our literary tradition. And so I think the fact that you are publishing some of the letters your father wrote to you, and in a way, letters you might have written to him, is rather a wonderful medium with which to discover for the viewer, for the reader, more about your father. She's also said that you are looking at your life through his eyes. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. But what I want to ask you is that he did die in 1984, and we're now in 2022. How did you decide to do this? And in a way, what took you so long?
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, everybody, for listening, whoever is present. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me and giving me time. This book, which is now in the market and available, is different in a manner of speaking that a lot of people have said it could be called my memoirs. It's not. It could be called my biography. It's not. It is, in a manner of speaking, a conversation. And that seems to be a kind of a very different kind of a genre that not many people perhaps would be familiar with, or that I've just sort of made it up as I went along, because I did want to put the letters out there. This has to do, obviously, with the gap of 2 years, even more, perhaps 2.5 years, when everybody was locked up. There was nothing to do. We were all sort of brooding and sitting back and wondering what had hit the world, etc., etc. I was one of them as well. And then sitting there and just reflecting, going back to the past, thinking of past friends, past people, relationships, what went wrong, what went right, and so on and so forth. I came across, a thought that came to me, although the thought came to me, as you may remember, Victoria, so more than that, it was about 5 years ago, when I somehow, again, must have been in a moment of, as I say, solitude, that I thought that I have these wonderful letters that my father wrote to me from his exile days, as well as other days as well, that I thought should be put out there. And I made that commitment at the Karachi Literary Festival. This was about 5 years ago. And then, as we all know, things happen, interruptions come, distractions come, and suddenly more things are important than the ones that you should be doing. And then the actual focus came back to me during the COVID, when I thought that I have to get down to this, and that I had made a public commitment, as well as the fact that I need to now start getting myself into gear, as it were. Victoria, as I'm sure a lot of people out there who are listening, writing is not a switch of a button. Writing could be, but if it's going to be something with some thought, something with some emotion, something with some sensitivity, it's not something that you can switch on and switch off. It just has to happen. It just has to flow out of you. And so I think when I was sitting there in one of those days quietly, I was looking through the letters and thinking, why don't I go back to this assignment, this commitment that I had made, a public commitment, actually. Mm-hmm. And then it just happened. And I had these 2 wonderful granddaughters, poor darlings, who I put to business. I said, okay, separate the letters. So they sat down, they started separating the letters and the postcard and so on and so forth. There was a lot of homework that went into it. And then they were set aside according to the years and months. And then comes the decision. Okay, how does one do it? Just print them? Is that the way it's going to be? I thought about that. I thought about taking it year by year, month by month. And I thought that wouldn't be a... And then, I talked to my son, and he's a creative boy, very creative person. And he said, no, this
is Ali, is it? This is your...
No, this is Adil, the younger one.
Adil, you have 2 sons, Adil and Ali.
I have 2 sons. Ali is the one who kept saying, get on with it, get on. He's a doctor. He's a doctor, right? So he's that kind of thing. Get on with it, get on with it, get on with it type. And so Adil is more the creative one. So I sat with him, and that's when he came up and he said, okay, why don't you do it this way? You've been, not complaining, but mentioning off and on that I wish I had told about that. I used to call my father Abu, and so on and so forth. So he said, why don't you write to him now? Tell him that what's happening in your life now, or since he's gone. And that thought started then, in a manner of speaking, germinating in my head, kind of brewing. It would come, it would go, it would come, it would go. And that's how I started writing what I did start writing. And then, of course, comes a time when you have to put it into chapters, because there is so much happening in your life. And so then I started making the chapters and titling them. The title, actually, Victoria, is what made me write the rest of the chapter. I always would go for the title first. The title would come, and then that.
to have a chapter title to work to. But what I would point out is that they're interesting chapter titles. There's not a chronology as such. It's more thematic. And that was how you chose to do it.
Yes, I kind of have this, some call it a weakness, I call it a strength. I just take a leap and somehow I land on my feet. I could stumble a bit, but
Yeah.
then somehow. So I just would pick up a thought, and then say, okay, now how do I structure it? Like, for example, if I may, well, there's nothing much to give away. It's a very thick book, thickish sort of anyway. So, I mean, television, PTV, Pakistan television, is a major part of my life, professional life. I can call myself one of the pioneers who was the first woman to have been hired by PTV, and then I was the first woman going upwards as well. So I think that's what sort of made sense. Okay, one chapter on PTV. Then comes, you think about your college days, and those college days, Kinnaird College, is another so important part of my life, because still so many of my friends, I would call them more than friends, they're soulmates, are still with me and have been through the journey. So like that, I kind of put them in chunks. I clump them together, and then the thoughts would just happen.
Yes. Well, I think one of your first chapters is, in fact, inspired by the photograph of your father, his first visit to see your eldest son, his eldest grandson. And you've titled the chapter, "Whenever I See This Photograph." And so that again set in train a whole sort of thought process of recollections, where again,
Yes,
you're talking to your father.
that was his first visit to Lahore. I mean, Ali was born in Karachi because, they were in Karachi. So I went to Karachi. He was born there. But then I brought him back to Lahore because that's where I was living. And this was his first visit, actually. I mean, because when he was born, he was just a small little kid and, just a baby. And, my father did the usual bit. When a Muslim boy is born or a girl, then you're supposed to say the azan in the ear of the child. He did that, and he named him. He gave the name and so on and so forth. He was very sick the night that Ali was born. He had flu and fever, and that's a funny thing also, that my mother just knocked. It was 3 o'clock in the. All babies are born right in the morning, right at the very wee hours of the morning. So then she knocked on the door and she said, "Faiz, I'm going." And so he just raised his head. I believe he had high fever at that time. And he said, "Okay, tell me when he is born." And we later on did discuss that. Why did you say he? Why did you say he is born? He said, "I don't know. It just came to me." So those are, and the name he decided, etc. So this was his first visit, that photograph. I find it so tender. It is such a soft photograph of him looking at his grandson, first grandson that he had. And Ali, I can say that to some extent. I will not say any of the grandchildren were favorites, but he did have a soft corner for Ali. One, because he was the first. Second, because he was so tall. Thirdly, because he could see in him, as he said to him, that you are like me. Don't be so, the word is sharif, don't be so considerate and kind, meaning be naughty and do the same. But Ali is a very straightforward, steady, gentle kind of person. So I think, in a manner of speaking, he was inclined towards talking to Ali, being the eldest, of course, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So, and Ali was the one.
Nice that I mean, this forms one of your recollections and one of your conversations with your father is going back on that visit, on that photograph. Now, we should, of course, point out that you did not have an ordinary family life, in that your father was not only a brilliant and beloved poet and journalist, but he had very, very strong political views. And for those political views, you were often separated from him. And I think again, the fact that when you were 5 years old, he was taken to prison. He also lived in exile. He worked back in Pakistan and worked as a journalist. And then ultimately, fast forwarding to the end of his life, from 1979 till his death in 1984, he lived in exile, all at a period when you were a young woman growing up and going to college. And so part of the poignancy, I think, of the conversations are because so much physical present time was missing during his lifetime. And there's one, another chapter where it's called Asking for Money. So perhaps you could, as I say, these are very unusual. They're not what you call the conventional chapter titles. Perhaps you could tell us how Asking for Money came about.
I think that's probably because when you are, I think every child, I can say that, I'm sure I don't have any quantitative researches on this, no facts and figures, but I hardly ever can think of a child who doesn't ask for money or wants money for something or the other, whether it's pocket money or whatever it is. Anyway, so I was in college and I was obviously in the hostel, as they call it. And so I was, well, every, not short of money, but my father used to travel a lot and my mother was the one who was in charge of sending money and so on and so forth. And my mom, I mean, I won't call her frugal, but I would certainly say she was careful. She was careful with money because we were not affluent in that sense of the word and so on and so forth. We were okay. So she didn't want me to get probably, be spoiled and have so much. So there was always this thought that, and what did I want money for? Frankly, Victoria, I can't remember. I mean, because all our needs were looked after. When you're in the hostel, your food is paid for, your room and everything else. So it was probably that odd day out to have an ice cream or something like that, perhaps, or maybe you never really know, maybe to show off to my friends that I had money and they didn't, that kind of thing also. And so I must have written to him for money and he must have sort of quietly kept that letter from my mother. I'm absolutely sure. I don't think he would have shared it with her. And then he sends it to me quietly. He would, let me just say, a couple of words here also. He would visit Lahore for work, and he would write to me or call me and say that I'm visiting Lahore. And then he would get permission from the warden to take me out. And those were the times when this envelope would find its way into my hand, which would have a small amount of money, extra money, just like that. Here it is for you. Yeah. I mean,
it's a common gesture from a parent. Yes. But what I think stems out of it, which again is revealing more about Faiz, the man and the person as he was. I mean, again, we have the public persona of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, but what you're trying to do also is reveal another side to him, which, as you've said in your book, only you and your sister, Salima, your older sister, she was 4 years older to you, also very well known in Pakistan, knew him better and sides of him than anybody else. And it's where you write, that you were never embarrassed about asking for money because you and I had that relationship of absolute trust, self-esteem, and immense love. And I think what comes out of this book and how you have assembled it is the tremendous love between father and daughters. And I think that's what, it's not just a personal explanation, but it's in a way we all recreate that in our own relationships with our parents.
Which and would you believe it, Victoria? I know this sounds odd, but not to me. Even today, I receive money from him. The royalties that come to me and my sister. How odd that they come at a time when I need the most.
Yes.
Really. Yes. It's very unusual. Suddenly there's a phone call. Or, I mean, of course, there are times that we know, but there are phone calls that come in and say, Madam, from across the world, because, his books are published and because we have the copyright. So nothing can be printed without our permissions for the Faiz Foundation. So we get telephone calls or emails and saying that, there's a certain amount, how would you like that to be transferred, etc., etc. And suddenly you think, goodness me, I needed that money.
Yes. Yes.
So he's giving us money even today. And a
Yes.
lot of people ask me, what has Faiz left you? What did Faiz, I said, we never got any land, no bank balances, no cars, no feudal fiefdoms, nothing. What we got was a book of poetry.
Mm.
And that is our heritage. And that heritage will carry on not only just for me, but for the next generation and the next generation. And that heritage is sustaining us.
Yes. No,
So
it's a wonderful heritage. It's something to be very proud of. And I will say, as someone who does not read Urdu fluently, and I know the poems are best read in Urdu, that I'm delighted they have been translated in English and are available worldwide, because
Yes.
again, it has opened Faiz, who is so well known in Pakistan, but perhaps he would be less well known in the rest of the world.
Of course.
Had it not been translated. And again, without knowing what you're missing, the English translations are also, rather lovely. And
yes.
I think
because
that they work.
People who understand Urdu well, that's not me, but anyway, and who understand the traditions and the traditions of poetry, talk about how Faiz's poetry has layers and layers. And so when you translate a poem, I think you would probably take the first layer, perhaps the literal meaning to some extent. But there are also several layers below that. There are historical references, there are religious references, there are language references that perhaps maybe, I can only say maybe, difficult for the translator to put it all into that one single word or phrase or metaphor or verse. So translation to some extent, I find, does reduce the effect and the passion that verse speaks about. And especially a person or a poet like Faiz, who actually inspires from Arabic, from Persian, from Urdu, and takes his images from different mega poets, and and speaks and writes in their tradition. And a lot of people say that this is from Iqbal, this is from Ghalib, this is, he's sort of the same school, as it were. So, and then transforms them into the issues of today, for the people of today to understand what he's talking about. But yet the school of thought, the traditional explanation, goes back centuries to that poet who was the actual initiator. So he is a lot of people say, a very complex poet to understand. Yes. And if you can understand the language, which unfortunately you perhaps cannot, you can actually see the colors that he's describing. You can hear the music that he's describing, the sounds that he's describing, the fragrances that he's describing. They are so beautifully woven into words that you actually feel that it's not just words that you're reading, you're actually feeling that whiff of perfume, or that gentle breeze that he's talking about, or the moonlight that he's describing that is shining, filtering through the trees or the leaves. And some of the poetry, or most of the poetry, as you know, was written during the time that he was confined in jail. And that poetry obviously is a poetry of, in a manner of speaking, sadness, obviously, never of despair, sadness, solitude, loneliness, but always talking about that one ray of hope, that one thought that keeps him going, that today, it may be not, today is a bad day, but there will be a dawn tomorrow, and that dawn will liberate you and me and everybody else, something like that. I'm sorry, I'm doing a very crude.
No, I think you're expressing that very well, which really rather brings me to my next question in terms of he had a very difficult life, as we know. Do you think that the poetry And in your sort of pursuit of your conversations emanated from that challenging life, would the poetry perhaps have been different? Would he perhaps not, did he express himself through poetry, which in a way brought solace to the very challenging life he had?
Now that is a question I should have asked, shouldn't I? That's
Yes.
my last chapter of the book.
Yes, but you have got questions. You have got a later chapter in the book, questions I didn't ask. Discussions we never had, questions I never asked.
You know, Victoria, to me, I mean, believe you me, I know this may sound ridiculous, but to me, he was, of course, he was a poet. Everybody knew he was a poet. But to me, he was never a poet. He was always the father, the figure around, a warm, gentle, soft smell, lovely. He used to, the perfume that he used to wear, etc., but never for, I mean, and I sat in many musharas, as we call them, poetry recitals. I was at the back or something, but somehow it never quite struck me that, you know, this was the reason for his very being. To me, he was just a father. How did I discover Faiz the poet? Is unfortunately, as we all do, like you said in the beginning, is when they leave.
Yes.
When something is removed from your life, you to some extent realize its value. And this is the time when we started in Faiz Gar, which is a small institution that we've set up in Lahore. We started poetry classes, as it were. So Dr. Arthur, who's a great Urdu scholar, she took it upon herself, and once a week she would sit down and take a poem at a time, and literally read it, explain the background, explain the literal meaning, as well as explain the metaphorical meaning. And it is through those classes, if I may say so, those sessions of poetry sessions, that I began to understand Faiz the poet.
Yes.
And because he was, I must say, he was extremely, how should I say, disciplined in writing. Where did he write that poem? What was the year that it was written? So you could somehow get into the mood of it.
Contextualize.
So you could know that this is written and that. So in that sense, you started understanding what he was going through at that particular period in time to write that particular poem. Like if he's writing about the students, for the students of Iran during the revolution, then you understand what the students were going through. Or if he was writing about South Africa, it was during the apartheid and the movements there that you could feel the pain of those people who were suffering all of that, those restrictions. The same with the Palestine, the same with Cuba, all of that. So this kind of helped me understand those periods of his life that he would not be there, perhaps personally. And the times that he was there, Victoria, there was so little time that you just had to, how are you, what's happening, what are you doing, would you like to go, you know, so it was just spent in, shall I say, shallow conversation, perhaps might be a word that hurts, but that is the kind of conversation you would,
basic sort of facts and figures of the day.
Yeah, you know, what did you do today? What is happening? Where is Ali? Where is Adil? Where is Umay? What are you doing? So can you send me, because his house was in front of mine, I was at the back. So send me a cup of tea. So let's have a cup of tea, something like that. And then suddenly somebody would appear and interrupt. And there would be a guest. And then it was time for me to move on.
Now, of course, you did grow up with a father who was a famous poet. And you've got another chapter here, which is, do you also write poetry? Because what you've talked about is the linkage of names. You know, before you married, your name was Faiz, and you get respect and love and admiration, even adoration, from having been the daughter of Faiz. But at the same time, people assume that you also might write poetry.
Yes, that used to be a very embarrassing question.
Yes,
because you know it was usually probably it couldn't have been asked in jest. I think they were quite serious, but and they wanted the answer yes. And my goodness, I thought to myself, if I say yes, then they're going to say, oh, she's going to be what, better than him? My God. And my mother, as I mentioned, I think several times, many people asked her that, you know, Mrs. Faiz, do you write poetry? And she would say, no, one poet in the family is enough. And so I think he's doing his job and doing it pretty well. But she did towards the later end of her years, in her book, she's written 2 beautiful books as well. And there have been some poems in there, obviously in English, but she's written some poems as well, which are her reflection of her life and so on and so forth. But no, nobody, how can you compete?
But I think it's rather nice you've got this chapter where you, you're identifying that because of your closeness, that people, assume you have the same attributes. And this brings me on to another chapter, which is smugness. Thy name is Faiz, because part of your purpose of writing the book is to reveal sides of Faiz which people might not understand. And I think there's rather a charming sort of exchange which you describe, where perhaps you would like to describe it, because it's rather nice, and I think it applies to anybody actually who's famous.
When I was writing this book, a thought has just occurred to me, Victoria. I think I have mentioned it. I did speak to several friends, and I said, there may be thoughts, there may be feelings, there may be images that will come to my mind, which I'm not sure if I want to share. Would that shatter the image that they have of Faiz? Would that make him less of a man that they had idolized? There was this
yes, that's always the challenge. Are you going to dispel? Yes.
And that, and then that's where the disloyalty wall comes in, and you think, am I being disloyal? And yet you're not. So, I did go through a lot of that. And this chapter, Smugness, and my name is Faiz, is a part of that, which is pretty controlled, because there was a lot there that I might have written, in the sense that he did, like any human being, enjoy praise. He did like to be adored. He did like to be placed on a pedestal. It was his right. He deserved it. But yet he never verbalized it. He always kept it very down under. And there were times when I can say that I could see through that.
Yes.
I could see that, oh my God, look at that. He's really feeling happy about it, And he kept saying, no, koi baat nahi, no, something like that. Or just, sort of shrug it off, smile it off, giggle it off. He would really giggle a lot, laugh a lot. But there were times when, especially in those big poetry recitals, the big ones that we have in Pakistan and India, the tradition of the mushaira. Because in the mushaira, the tradition is that the bigger the poet, the senior the poet, he comes last, towards the end.
Yes.
You don't bring them in the front. Yeah. And he would always feel that, and he was not, and there was a time when there were a couple of times when some others, no names taken, would insist on being the last, whereas he should have been the last. And he would just laugh and say, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Wherever, knowing that he would get the most applause.
Because he should have been last. He should have
been last, but he was never one of those who would make that into an ego problem, ever. He would just say, okay, that's fine, then I can go early. Can I go early? Can you have me read early so I can go early? And he would just get up and then appreciate and go. But he knew that, his departure would probably affect the whole mushaira. So that's when I say smugness, there were several times when people would walk up to him and ask him, salam him, and he would say, wa alaikum salam. And I would just say, even in London, I remember once, and I would say, who was he? He said, I don't know. So I said, but you salamed him. He said, doesn't matter. He knew me. I don't have to know everybody who comes up to me.
Yes.
So, I knew that he was really feeling satisfied inside and happy.
Yes.
And
but at the same time, I think it shows a certain awareness that what pleasure it would have given to the person he may not have recognized. It reveals a side of his character.
Absolutely.
Whereas, he could easily have just passed him by because he didn't recognize him. But that person would have felt, I have been salamed, I've been greeted by Faiz.
and very, very humbly. So thinking that he was, there were several times, Victoria, in my life that I have met people who have told me how my dad affected their lives, how he walked that extra mile to make a telephone call for them, to visit, to go to an office where the officer nearly had a heart attack when Faiz walks in and asks for a meager, small favor of, can you transfer this person from here to there? Or can you raise his salary? Or something very small according to the, and they would say, Faisa, why did you come? Why didn't you just call us? Why? He said, no, it's okay. I wanted to come and see your office. I thought I'd come and say hello. I just thought, so can I have a cup of tea? Several times people have said that to me. Now that I can't imagine that the man had nothing to do that day, or that he was bored, or that he, it was just the magnanimity of the openness, the wanting to help somebody, and knowing that that presence, that physical presence, is actual being there. Those 20 minutes or half an hour would make so much difference to that person's life, future life or whatever. And he would do it completely without batting an eyelid.
Yes.
And
well, that's also his legacy, that people will now tell you that. So that's part of his legacy. Now, there's two other aspects which I think reveal your own longing to sort of fill in some of the gaps. And one of them is Kabul and Afghanistan in 2004. And you're posing the question, I never talked to you about whether you went to Kabul. And then, of course, you discover that he did go to Kabul in 1978 after the fall of the royal family.
Yeah.
And I think you're, in a way, what you're doing, you're coloring in the gaps. And then the other one, of course, is Kashmir, the importance you attached to going to Srinagar because your parents were married there in 1941. And again, we all know of all the places to go, that was a really big challenge. And yet it meant so much to you to go back to where your parents were married.
It meant so much to me, and I was fortunate enough to have a visa to be able to cover that. And not to say that my heart was not beating every second of the day, a little worried, because one, of course, that I was a Pakistani, I was carrying a Pakistani passport, and otherwise also, there was surveillance, constant surveillance, and so on and so forth. But I was in touch with the place. The place, this was a kind of a guest house that they were married in, which has now, obviously, which afterwards became a college. And so the principal of the college, and very nice, Basharat Peer is one of the writers who helped me through this. And
yes, the author of Curfew Night, which
that's right,
one of the very early books.
He came down from Delhi. He was there with me. He took me to that. I'm very, very grateful to him and his wife Ananya. And so he helped me. So that the whole process of actually, first of all, standing there, and then the principal came up and said, "Madam, would you like to come and have a cup of tea?" And I just immediately said, "Can I go to that room, please?" And so they took me to that room, and it says Gosha Affairs. It's also printed in the book. And just the thought, it was following those footsteps.
Yes.
And just perhaps getting closure of some sort, I'm not sure. And then going to the room where they were actually married, and the nikah took place. And then my mother says that and there's a very small documentary which is also on YouTube, in which she describes the barat, which is the bridegroom, in which we know, if you know, in Pakistan, they are sort of like hundreds. There were three people in his barat.
Yes.
There was his brother, his younger brother, and there was a political activist. Naeem, I think, was his name, and there was one other person. That's all. There were three people that he took in the barat. So this whole feeling of being in that place where the ceremony happened, and they became husband and wife.
Yes.
And the whole relationship that continued. It's just I had to go there, and it was very emotional. And then somebody came up to me from the college, I think it was a teacher, and said that she had met my mother, who had come after many years and stood in that room and said, "This is the room," and described it.
Yes.
And of course was in tears and so on and so forth, naturally. I don't know, I just sort of...
By which time, of course, you visited. Your mother had passed on also.
Of course.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
So again, many stories that I didn't ask her as well.
Yes, another story. But that's why I think the book does speak beyond its confines of your relationship, because we've all, I think, in a way, often, particularly at this stage of life, wanted to retrace where our parents were at particular moments in time that meant
Yes.
a lot to us. I recently did the same thing in Italy with my father. He'd written about places he'd been when he was in Italy. And I'd done the same thing. I'd wanted to go to where he'd lived and where he'd walked. And I think so that's why the book does speak to all of us. We all ought to be having some conversations with our parents.
And hopefully finding peace.
And indeed finding peace. Now, one aspect of your father's character, which I think you reveal very well in his own letters, because we've talked also quite a lot about the conversations you might have had with him, but interspersed in the book are his own letters to you, is a letter which displays his sense of humor. And I'm now going to ask you, as his daughter, to read it. It's not a very long letter, so I think for the Urdu listeners among us, if you'd like to read it in Urdu first.
Okay.
And then to give us the translation, because it's a rather marvelous letter. And again, it would be nice to listen to Faiz in his own words.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that this book does bring out, or the letters bring out, is his sense of humor.
Exactly.
Because a person with that kind of commitment, that kind of passion, that kind of fortitude, you would think that he would be extremely serious. He was, but he also had this small boyish funny side to him that is revealed through some of his letters, I think.
Yes, I think this is right. This one is the one I'm asking you to read, is written on the 11th of April from Beirut in Lebanon, where, as I mentioned earlier, he went into self-imposed exile. And it's in 1980, of course, only 4 years before he died.
Yes, so if I may. Pyari Mizu, that's my nickname. तुम्हें एक खत लिखा ही था कि तुम्हारा दूसरा खत आ गया, बहुत खुशी हुई. दफ्तरी दर्द सर का जैसे मैंने लिखा है, कोई इलाज नहीं. जहां तक हो सके हमारा स्विच ऑफ वाला नुस्खा इस्तेमाल कर लेना चाहिए. इससे भी अच्छा नुस्खा मरहूम मलिक फिरोज खान नून का है, लेकिन वो शायद सिर्फ बड़े अफसर इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. वो नुस्खा ये है कि जब हम दिल्ली में थे तो मलिक साहब वॉइसरॉय की काउंसिल के डिफेंस मेंबर थे. एक दिन मैं और बड़े बुखारी साहब दफ्तर में उनसे मिलने गए. देखा कि मलिक साहब की मेज पर एक ही कागज नहीं और वो हाथ पर हाथ धरे बैठे हैं. बुखारी साहब ने कहा, मलिक साहब, लड़ाई हो रही है और आप डिफेंस मेंबर हैं, आपको कोई काम नहीं है. मलिक साहब बोले, शाह जी, कम दा ना पूछो, जिन्ना करो उन्ना ही वध है, इसलिए असी करदे ही नहीं. And then I think, I presume that I had written to him something about money or something. I think I wrote to him saying that I wish I had more time to pamper you, to look after you, to love you, to serve you. And that's the answer he gives me. And to pay back so much of what you have given me. And this is what he answers. और ये एहसान चुकाने की क्या बकवास है, जैसे हम तुम कोई अलग अलग चीज हैं. हमारा तुम्हारा एहसान यही है कि प्यार करते रहें, और खिदमत करने की जरूरत तो शायद जब पड़ेगी कि अगर और 10-20 बरस जीना पड़ा और हाथ पांव जवाब दे गए, फिर तो हम गांव चले जाएंगे जहां मिरासी हुक्का भरेगा और मिरासन पांव दबाएगी. बहुत सा प्यार, अब्बू.
Yes, that's lovely. Perhaps we might now have the translation, but I think again it's lovely, the sense of humor.
As I had written, there can be no solution to office problems. I presume I must have been whining about my office problems. So as far as possible, apply my switch off prescription. A better prescription is that given by Malik Firoz Khan Noon, but then perhaps that can only be applied by very senior officials. When I was in Delhi, Malik Saab was the member of defense of the Viceroy's Council. One day, I and Bukhari Senior went to see him in his office. What do we see? That there is not a single piece of paper on Malik Saab's table, and he's smoking a cigar with not a care in the world. Bukhari Saab said, Malik Saab, there is a war going on. You are a member of defense, and here you are doing no work. Malik Saab said, Shahji, don't talk about work. The more you do it, the more it expands. So I just don't work.
I think
Which
that's
frankly is very good advice.
the sense of humor, yes, coming through.
And then he says, and what is this rubbish about paying back? You and I are not strangers. The only relationship to pay back is that of love. And that we continue to love each other. I might need your help if I have to live another 10, 20 years. And if I become handicapped, in that case, I shall go back to the village where the Mirasi will keep refilling my pipe and his wife, the Mirasan, will bless my feet. Lots of love to everybody. Abu. And I remember writing that letter somehow so clearly, Victoria. I
Yes.
remember it must have been a moment in which I must have missed him dreadfully to have said that I have not had the opportunity to
Yes.
serve you, as we say, serve your parents, like
Yes. Honor your
feed them,
parents.
be with them, look
Yes.
after their
Yes.
needs. But as he says, all you need is love.
I
That's
think
all
it is
we
a
need.
very, it reveals a sense of humor, but it's also very revealing about his personality. And again, it speaks to all of us. You see, this love that exists and the sense of obligation we feel to our parents, but at the same
Yes.
time, we might not have always risen to the task and to the challenge,
Yes.
and that feeling of regret.
Yes,
Now,
it's a sense of guilt also, of not
yes,
giving
yes.
enough time, of
Yeah.
finding other other things, other distractions, whereas you feel that your parents needed you at that time.
Yes, yes, but again, it's as I say, part of the life. Now, you've also got another section where you wanted to share certain moments with him, and in particular, the meeting with Abdul Salam, Benazir Bhutto, and Mother Teresa, and Malala, all of whom you've met. But you somehow wanted to share those meetings, as I think we all do when we've met someone exciting. We want to tell our parents, "Oh, I've met so."
Yes, or you've achieved maybe something, like maybe a prize or something like that. I should have mentioned it, but I didn't. I mean, the day when it was announced that I would be given the Pride of Performance Award by the President of Pakistan. That too was a moment that I thought that I wish he had been here. He would have been very happy. Or he might have said, if I know him, he might have said, "Oh, now they're giving it to you. They should have given it to you 20 years ago." But I mean, that's very sweet of it. But yes, these are moments, that I felt that, considering the fact that, Malala and Mother Teresa and Dr. Abdul Salam, they're all Nobel Prize winners. And of course, the very fact that I sat across the first woman prime minister and spoke to her. And we after the meeting, after the conversation, I remember very clearly that she did mention, she talked and she said, you are Faiz's daughter. And I said, yes, ma'am. And then, of course, we brought up her father, my father, and their relationship and so on.
Yes, because they did have an important relationship.
Very, very so. And Bhutto Saab, in fact, was the person who persuaded my father. At that time, my father, he'd just come into government, and my father was sitting at home, and he persuaded him. In fact, he needed some persuasion. No, Faiz Saab, you have to come to Islamabad. You have to come and work with us. And then he set up the Pakistan National Council of the Arts, the Lok Birsa, and he took over the cultural
scene. Isn't it?
Oh yes, very much in existence and very much there, and then of course the Arts Council and everything. And Bhutto Saab was extremely adamant, to give him that position and brought him forward, and etc. The rest is history. But anyway, yes. So
it was important for you to meet Benazir, and of course it was during her first administration that posthumously your father was given the very high award, the Nishari Imtiaz.
That's right.
Which he hadn't previously received from the Pakistan government, although he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature and he
Yes.
received the Lenin Prize.
Yes, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize, but I think the story is that because of his association with the Palestinian movement and the fact that he was in Beirut and with the Lotus magazine, that was, well, it doesn't matter, but anyway, he was not given it. And yes, he got the highest award at that time. I escorted my mother to the president's house and we received it. Yes. It was a moment of great pride for all of us, obviously, and of course a feeling that I wish. No, well, things happen when they happen, don't they, Victoria?
Yes, indeed they do. Now, one of your later chapters, we are sort of running out of time. I would encourage any listeners to post any questions. I don't seem to see any questions, but I hope that's not my incompetence with the chat. But do put some questions if you've got them. Otherwise, I'll keep on chatting to Moneeza. But the sort of the finale is, you know, the discussions you never had and the questions you never asked. We've touched upon a few, but I mean, what is this sort of going to be? You know, a volume 2 where you maybe write some more questions that you never asked, or tell him more things that you have done?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how much of life or how much of activities I've got left to do, but there is, judging by, I could say, the response of the book at the moment. It's only been out since February. I presented it to the people of Pakistan on the 13th of February, 2022, which is his birthday. It was a birthday present, and it was launched in the Alhambra, and it was a very, very impressive launch, because as you might know, that Lahore is the city of literature, has been awarded the name of the city of literature by UNESCO. So the City of Literature was very kind, and they said that they would host this ceremony and present this book at that time, and so on and so forth, because 2 of the names that were quoted in the project proposal to request for the fact of the City of Literature, one was Iqbal and the other was Faiz. So it was really very important for Lahore. So I think the response that I have got so far has been one of great encouragement. So at the moment, the book is being translated in Urdu, Victoria, because at the launch that I had in Islamabad, in which our Iftikhar Arif Saab, who is one of our greatest Urdu poets now, senior most, pointed out very distinctly, as did Zahra Nigar, that this has to now be translated in Urdu, because this is a book that needs to be read more widely by more people. And so that's happening right now. And on the 13th of February, 2023, I hope to launch the Urdu version of it. Right. So once that happens, I will just sit down and hopefully not suffer another COVID to recollect what's going on in my life. But another book, no, there is some thought with my publisher who's saying, madam, that he's already in the process of bringing in the 2nd edition, because apparently there is a demand. So he's saying, madam, if you like, we could put in a couple of extra chapters. So
yes,
that's
I think that's what I was more thinking about.
Yes, that's a possibility that I might be thinking about, because life has moved on a bit in the last couple of years. So I may put down a few more, a couple of more chapters. But
now we are being asked by our host, Michael Ryder, which would be, for a non-Urdu reader, which books would you recommend? Is there any one translation in particular that we should be reading? I actually have a number of Faiz translations myself. Is there any one you would recommend?
I would highly recommend one, which is a translation done several years ago by Victor Cannon, who was a very dear personal friend of my father's. He was a Scottish writer, one of the writers of great, recognized. He came to Lahore, he lived in Lahore, he taught in Lahore. But I believe this book, the book that is his translation, is something that Faiz was very proud of and happy about. The second translation that he worked with, I am told. Again, these are stories that I've heard, but not actual stories, because Dr. Arfa Saida was present in Honolulu when this was happening. And Naomi Lazard, who passed away just about a couple of years ago, unfortunately, due to COVID, they were together in Honolulu, Hawaii. And they, at that time, were taking part in a seminar or whatever you want to call it. My father was in exile, he had free time, so he went. And Dr. Arfa was also present there. And she said, I used to watch evening after evening after evening that Faiz would sit with Naomi, explain the poem to her. She would then sit back, make a draft, and show it to him the next day. And he would oversee it and change it and so on and so forth. So that, unfortunately, the name escapes me, but Naomi Lazard. Yes, she's an American poetess. And that is but this is so unfortunate that I'm told that both these books may be out of print, but I'm not sure. But
Right.
Naomi Lazard, yes, and I think this was print. Obviously, it was published in America. It's a smaller book. Obviously, these are not complete collections; these are just selected poems. But I know these two were the ones in which my father was personally involved. Others, there are several. By people, you know, who have Shoaib, my brother-in-law, yes, has translated some. Dr. I forgot, Mehboob Haq has translated some. Dawood Ilyas has translated some. So Khalid Hassan has translated some. So there's several in that sense. But these are the ones that I would like to say.
Right. Okay. No. We'll take note of that. Now we are coming to the end, Moneeza, and I think I've got to thank you very much indeed for being in conversation with me. I think it's been wonderfully revealing, and as I say, I think that the book Conversations with My Father is it's really for all of us, because we've all had a relationship with our parents. And I'm just going to end on this last little sentence. I miss you, Abu. Can you lift that curtain once in a while and come back? And I think we all feel that about people we've loved deeply and that we miss. Thank you so much, Moneeza Hashmi, for being in conversation with me on behalf of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure.
And I'd like to add our thanks as well, because it's the RSAA that has been the principal beneficiary of your presence today. Thank you very much indeed. For the audience, if you are interested in Moneeza Hashmi's book, I've posted a link to it in the chat channel, and you'll also find there a link to a website which has published Victor Kiernan's translations of Faiz's poetry. The translation itself, as Moneeza said, does appear to be out of print, but it looks as though someone has posted the entire collection, presumably because it's out of copyright. So if you would like to see that, it's also in the chat channel. I ought to say a word or two about things that are coming up over the next few weeks. The programme is still developing, but on the 28th of September, for members of the Society only, the first meeting of what we are calling the Reading Room, an opportunity for Society members to meet and discuss books with their authors, will be held. That's 28th of September, when Geoffrey Kane is talking about his book on surveillance in China. It's called The Perfect Police State, China's Surveillance Dystopia. He'll be discussing that with Sophie Ibbotson. And on the 4th, I beg your pardon, of October, also a members only and guests event at the East India Club, we will be marking the publication of a book of recollections of Hugh Leach, someone dear to many members of the Society, and whose generosity has helped support the Society, particularly in most recent years. If you would like to come to either of those, please go to the RSAA website where you can log in as a member and book places. Thank you very much indeed. And apart from that, now my only task is really again to say thank you very much to Moneeza and Victoria, and goodbye. Hope to see you soon.